straighten out the other way. Oh, no, right now. Look up there. This spring has been very early. We always judge everything by when apples come in bloom. And normally apples blossom about May 15th. That's an average date. And I've seen them when they didn't bloom until almost the end of May. And this year, let's see, this is the 8th of May, and we're moving bees even about the 5th of May, which is the earliest I've ever seen it happen. That's a big problem with orchards, because when the bloom comes early, then they have a big fear of frost, a freeze. And as long as the blossoms are closed up tight, they can take a lot of cold weather. But when they start opening up and get a little more exposed, then they become more susceptible to frost damage. And when they're wide open, and if you get a freeze, I've seen a year when practically the whole crop was absolutely destroyed in the Champlain Valley. I remember Johnson's orchard in Middlebury. He had about 50 acres of apples. Took a pickup truck and they picked 15 bushels of apples out of 50 acres of apples. So that's how devastating a frost can be. The reason for moving bees into orchard, of course, is for cross-pollination. Apples, like a lot of the higher forms of plant life, in order to produce seed and fruit, have to be cross-pollinated. In other words, you know, here in the Champlain Valley, the main apple is a McIntosh. It's a very fine eating apple. And in the early days, when they first started growing apples, they used to grow whole blocks of McIntosh with no other variety. And then they wondered why they never got any apples. See, when they had just a few trees here and there was no trouble with apples because there were a lot of other apples around. And cross-pollination was automatic. But then when you got 50 acres of just McIntosh, well, then there was no cross-pollination at all. See, the McIntosh blossom will not set fruit with McIntosh pollen. It's got to be pollen from another variety of apple. Not only another variety, but it has to be a compatible variety. And it also has to bloom at the same time, and really when you study the pollination of plants, it gets as complicated as the love life of a movie actress. You know, a beautiful blossom on a plant is not wasted. It's a very essential part of the plant to perpetuate itself. In other words, the bees must be attracted to the blossoms with nectar and fragrance in order to pollinate these blossoms to produce seed. And that if it's a compatible pollen, the pollen will send a root down the pistil, from there clear down into the ovary. Now, if you can see from there, I'm not sure if you can, but there are little white spots right here, and those are the seed embryo. And this pistil right here is connected
to each of those seeds down in the ovary of the blossom. And that's where the sperm must travel down through that pistil and into the ovule of the seed and form fruit. Then when the seed is set, this part of the blossom will swell and grow into an apple. And the apple will grow, and then next fall, about September, you'll see this tree full of apples.
I got interested in bees when I was a youngster, about 14 years old. I was always interested in agriculture, and because when I lived on Long Island at that time, this goes back almost 70 years, and there was still a lot of farming on Long Island where I lived. And in fact, I worked on truck farms and that type of thing. And I was interested in bees. My neighbor had some bees, and I used to watch them working. And of course I got curious, wanted to know what the bees were doing. So I bought several hives of bees way back in 1919, right after the war. I was 14 years old. In 1928, I came to Vermont and started working with J.E. Crane, who was a beekeeper in Middlebury at that time. And then from then on, I started to go into commercial beekeeping myself. And I remember I had a Model T Ford then, and I drove up from New York, up Route 9. Of course, that was the only route north in those days from New York to Albany. And drove as far as New Haven. This, remember, was 1928, and I noticed on the map a road went to Middlebury from Fairhaven to Middlebury, and another road went from Rutland to Middlebury. And according to the map, I had another 15 miles to go to Rutland, and by going north from Fairhaven, I'd say 15 miles. But when I looked up the road, all I could see was a sea of mud with 2 water-filled tracks in it. And I said, well, maybe that isn't going to last very long, so I dropped the Model T into those 2 water-filled mud tracks and put it in low in the Model T. And I kept thinking I was going to run out of it, but I didn't run out of the mud until I got to Middlebury 30 miles later. That was my first experience with clay roads in Vermont in 1928. And that's how I got started beekeeping in Vermont. 1950, when I was developing the lots up on Chipman Hill. And I had a young fellow working for me, Raymond Goss. He was the son of Dr. Goss, the veterinarian at the time. And I had the ditches dug where I was putting in a sewer line and the water lines. And a terrific thunderstorm came up along towards the end of the day. So I told Raymond, I guess I'll go up and see if there's any water running into the ditches. I didn't want the ditches to cave in. And he said, I'll go up with you. I said, no, you don't have to. It's 5 o'clock. You've gone home. Maybe you'll need some help. So we both went up. We drove the car up the hill. I had a shovel, and when I walked down, I diverted the water a little bit. And it was such a terrific thunderstorm, we both stood there watching it. It was almost like 4th of July fireworks. Lightning was crashing all around us. And we were rather high up, as you know, up on the hill. But neither one of us paid any attention to lightning. It never bothered me. I was never afraid of it. And so finally, it was pretty near over, and Raymond said, well, that's the end of that rainstorm. And we turned to go back to the car, and that's the last thing he ever said. And the last thing I knew. And I don't know if anyone's had the experience of being hit by lightning, but personally, if I was going to be put to death, that's the way I'd like to die. Because when you're hit with lightning, you feel nothing, you hear nothing, you see nothing. Everything is an absolute blank. I never knew a thing. I could have just fallen to asleep or something as far as being conscious of anything. And I must have been dead for a couple of minutes anyway, because when I finally came to, I tried to move and I couldn't. And then finally I managed to get conscious, you might say. And I didn't know who I was or where I was. And I had to settle in my mind that I was a person living on a world with a whole lot of people. All that had to come back to me. It was sort of a strange sensation. The First World War, I was 37. Well, the First World War, I was just 14 when it was over. So I was 10 when it started, so I never got into that, of course. And then the Second World War in 41, I was here, and I was then, well, 37 or something like that. And I don't know, somehow or other, I never got into that one either. I remember going to a Navy, Naval Air Station school, sort of a class, like, and this one man who was in the Navy told about putting on a demonstration for the congressman in Washington about the great American naval air power. Well, he said these were pontoon planes, and they were torpedo planes, you know, drop torpedoes to fire at ships. And they were a mongrel job, and they installed the torpedoes between the pontoons to Hampton Roads, Virginia, see, in salt water. And they put on the pontoons, the torpedoes, and then they had to fly up past Washington on the Potomac and land on the Potomac to be ready when all the dignitaries wanted to see the demonstration. So when they landed on the Potomac, that was fresh water. And lo and behold, the planes couldn't stay afloat. They started to sink. So I had to ram the planes up on shore before they sank out of sight. And then they turned them around, and then when they were ready to put on demonstration, he said they'd rev up the engines and everyone would push and get enough velocity on the water so they wouldn't sink. And they finally managed to get them off, and then they got in front of your reviewing stand. And they dropped the torpedoes, made a big splash, and the congressman all oohed and awed. And then he said they had to work like the devil to find the torpedoes after they fired them because they couldn't buy any more. During the war here in Middlebury, I don't know if anyone remembers, but we had a state guard unit. And that was quite a lot of fun. Many of you may remember Ben Whistler, who was a sergeant in the state guard, and Beach Bly, who was lieutenant, and Dr. Slocum. He was he was a captain, very active in it. And we used to meet once a week, and we had a great time for several years in the state guard, so to speak. I don't know what use we were, but we had a lot of fun doing it anyway. We had a single barrel shotgun that we trained with. We didn't dare fire them. We thought they might blow up, but no, Vermont was safe as long as we were on guard. Bee venom therapy, of course, is a very old wives' tale. It goes back God knows how many centuries. Probably back to the dawn of history, I suppose, when the first caveman robbed out bee trees and got stung to death and found his arthritis got better. I suppose that was the beginning. So as soon as I started keeping bees, way back in 1919, I heard people say, oh, bee stings are good for arthritis. And for some reason or other, I don't know why, but all of a sudden I was struck, as I found out later, with rheumatic fever. One day I was a healthy young fellow, 28 years old. And the next day I was in bed, crippled, couldn't even get out of bed. Finally, I began to get damn sick and tired of it. And this one day in July, I guess it was, I was caging some queens, and I was working with the bees. See, when I work with bees, I usually work without a shirt, so my bare-waisted, bare-faced, bare hands, and just pants, trousers, and shoes is all I wear. So I don't get stung on the knees. I get stung in the hands and the face, but that's all. And so I was caging these queens one day, and I said to myself, I wonder if there's anything to this damn nonsense bee stings good for arthritis. And I still thought it was ridiculous that how could a sting from a honeybee do something like that? So I remember right on the inside of each knee, like something right about in this area, I knew it was extremely sensitive. If I took a Kleenex, you know, and hit it with a piece of Kleenex, it would send me flying with pain. It was that sensitive. So I put a sting on each of those hot spots. And I figured, well, if I'm going to put a sting on, I'll put it where it hurts the most. Of course, we now know of those spots as trigger points, which is quite similar to acupuncture. And I put the 2 stings on there and forgot about it. After all, I was getting stung in the hands and the face every day, so a couple more stings didn't amount to anything. And I went to bed that night, and I got up the next morning, and getting out of bed was like getting out of a chair. That is, I had to put my weight on my feet slowly because of the pain in my knees. I got up that next morning, and I stood up, and I immediately knew that there was something wrong. Something just didn't add up right. I said, what's happened? Stuff in my knees. No more pain in my knees. I said, my God, what in the hell happened? What is this? And I checked, and every trace of pain in my knees had absolutely disappeared overnight. Oh, I'm telling you, you can't believe the psychological shock that gives you. Right away you think, my God, I'm going nuts. You know, first thing, well, did I imagine I had arthritis the past 6 months? You know, was that imagination? Or do I imagine that I don't have it now? And of course, like they sometimes say, oh, it's just temporary. Well, maybe it is. Well, that happened 51 years ago. And if it's only temporary, 51 years is not bad. I think that's pretty good for me, anyway.
Department of Food Science and Technology at the Cornell University of New York Agriculture Experiment Station in Geneva. And he's been doing some work with honey on clarifying fruit juices. And honey apparently does an excellent job. You know, most fruit juices have some sediment in it. And they use chemical means to clarify it, whereas he found out that honey would clarify it very well, much safer and even better. So he had an article published in some food journal, and this lady in Venezuela read it, and so she wrote to him and wanted to get some information. She says, I want to congratulate you on your article, Fruit Juice Clarification with the Use of Honey and Pectinase, Journal of Food Science, and so on. And she wants to work on her thesis as honey as an antibody. In other words, honey is antibiotic material, which of course it is. Germs cannot live in honey because of various enzymes it has. Have you had your lunch yet? Okay, see you soon.
Charlie, in your years of doing this, would you want to just list off what you've had success empirically?
Dr. O'Connell, who was a student of Dr. Banks, he's in Connecticut, was a very individualistic doctor. He wouldn't associate with other doctors because he actually was, his head was up in the clouds. You know, he wasn't down here with ordinary people. And what that fellow did was bring you wouldn't believe. His philosophy was, if there's no cure, use the myth. Dropped stomach, crossed eyes, stroke, broken bones, things of that sort. Well, you know, I say, now wait a minute. You know, if you think bee venom is nuts, what are you going to say when he says he cured crossed eyes? Well, I saw the man himself. He was a policeman, apparently had an injury. And something happened, a little motor optic nerves, I don't know what happened. I went to ophthalmologist, nothing happened, couldn't do anything. Dr. O'Connell treated him, eyes straightened out, and the policeman told me himself. That was still hard to believe. Then we had a friend after that who was arthritic, and he had a wandering eye. You know, you'd look at you and the eye would drift, and then he'd turn his head and put his eye back, and then he'd look back at it again, and then it would drift off again. He got some arthritis, he was treated his arthritis. He came back one day and said, "Have you noticed my eye doesn't drift anymore?" Well, we got so used to it, we never paid any attention to it. We never noticed it. But look, gee, that's right. When he talked to me, his eye stayed right there. It never drifted. I saw it, I looked at it, I treated the guy. Well, I still don't believe it. What are they going to do? Of all the wonderful results, I think Krista is one of the prize ones. I have quite a few, but
I know you do.
when you came in today, you know, I had to look at you twice. I said, gee, that can't be Krista. Of course, I'm looking back when you first came here.
Yeah. That was over 6 years ago.
You practically carried him.
Yeah,
Your
I was
husband
caught
drove you over.
Yeah. Because I had taken medication from 1970 till 1980 for 10 years. And that was all the way from gold treatment and 6 years of prednisone, which almost just about killed me.
Imagine 6 years of prednisone.
I don't even want to think about it. And I figured out that in 10 years I must have, this is all, of course, because the doctor suggested it, you know, that you do what you're told. I took about 60,000 aspirin in 10 years. It's a miracle I had a stomach left, but I do. But then all of a sudden I just knew that there was no help for me anymore. I would have to stop everything. But of course that didn't mean that the arthritis went away. And even my medical doctor agreed with me there was no medication that could help me anymore. So I had heard about Mr. Mraz already 5 years before that, and I regret very much that I didn't go then, but I thought it was bizarre to sit and get stung by bees, because I've always been running away from them. And but there was nothing else to do, and we came, and as I said, I almost crawled in. And it was hard the first year, because I have arthritis in every joint in my body. And to
And
get...
you're so loaded with drugs on top.
Yes, so you stop the drugs, of course, while the cortisone, of course, I tapered off for a whole year. Otherwise, I guess I would have been in serious trouble if I hadn't done that. But I started with the bees, and it was rough. But with Mr. Mraz's encouragement and the people I met, it's fascinating to talk to the people who've been on bees and their dogs and everything else, you know. It's just fantastic. But it still hurts, and it still hurts today to get stung by bees. But the result, I took 6 weeks of bees the first time, and Mr. Mraz said, now we stop. And of course the swellings and the itching just drove me crazy. And we kept coming back from Plattsburgh to here because you need encouragement, you know, to keep it up. He said we stopped, and I could go for a whole month the first time with quite a lot of relief. And you have to think, I didn't take one aspirin. Then I came back a month later, and we started in again. 6 weeks, and you know, you took something like 300 stings in 6 weeks. And then I went 2 months with a lot of relief. And every time I went back, I would go a month later, until one day I was up to 8 months before I went back to bee treatment again. And you know, when you don't take medication and you don't have any pain, well, you get more active. When you're on medication, you always have to rest at noontime for 2 hours because you're exhausted. Well, after you stop medication, you are not tired anymore. I knew that was the reason I was tired, you know, that it's the medication that knocks you out. And it's just fantastic. Now I can go up to 10 months without. As I said, I was in Europe last month to visit my relatives in Denmark, and some of them hadn't seen me since 1978 when I was in very bad shape. They couldn't get over the chains in me, you know. But when you're free of pain, I mean, you just feel like a whole new person, you know. And it's all thanks to you.
I want to try and find what we call the trigger points, which is a foci of the pain, where the pain is localized. So what you do is you press, and you watch the face. And when they jump, you know, you hit what we call a trigger point. The only one she spun here was this one. That one hurts. Now let's see, how about here? Wrist. That hurts there, you see. Yeah. Now that very good one here is up between the spine, up in this area. It's usually quite painful. Is that it?
Yeah.
Goes from there and follows this meridian down through here, down through in the shoulder here. See it? It's huge spots. And then it goes to the elbow right here, and then down into the hands. Now use ice when you give a bee sting, and you just hold the ice on there, like that. Hold that. Yeah. Now this is a kind of different. Now you see why doctors don't like to use live bees, because these bees don't like it in here. They want to get out. Now what you have to do is you have to reach in.
Talk to it.
And then you try to pick up a bee. You have to pick it up by the head or the thorax. The sting is at the tip of the abdomen. And then when you touch the sting to the skin, see, the sting will stick, and you pull the bee away, and the sting is left in. Now that sting, the honeybee sting, is a very complex mechanism. It has a couple of barbs which are activated by muscles that work back and forth. Like one is barb, goes in, holds barb, and goes back and buries itself right into the skin. At the same time keeps pumping the venom into it. And so when you give the first sting like that, you just leave it in for a few seconds like this, and then you take it out. And if you look at it closely, if you have pretty good eyes, you'll notice the barb. In fact, you'll even see a little drop of venom at the end of the barb. And that barb is only a 32nd of an inch long. The other 3 feet that you feel is just your imagination.
No, I've seen a lot of videos. They don't bother me now. In the beginning, they did sting for a while, but they don't now. It's like 5 minutes and I forget it. It doesn't bother me anymore now. Not at all. In the beginning, it did, and I would be driving home and I'd think, oh, what is that sting there? Oh, what is that sting there? But now, it doesn't. In fact, sometimes now it doesn't swell very much. I'm a little bit disappointed. Well, that reaction sounds because I'd like it to be way up, you know.
But when you take about 15 stings, though, it does hurt for about 20 minutes, you know, because that's what I take at a time, 15. But then I usually take them before dinner so that I go out and cook, and then I forget about it.
Yeah.
But it does take about 20 minutes, then it stops.
Hey, why don't you just stay right there, Glass? We can see you well up there.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, Gladys isn't a real old customer. What, 30 years ago?
What'd you say, 30?
Yeah,
Just about.
30 years ago. When she came here 30 years ago, she told me, I don't know if she was serious, but she was really seriously talking about committing suicide. You were in such pain.
I was a wreck. I really was. And Charlie came to my rescue. And I've been coming ever since, haven't I?
And how old are you, Gladys?
I'll be 88 in December.
She is younger now than she was 30 years ago. Am I right?
Right.
Well, this is October, and it's time to get the bees ready for winter. And so just for demonstration, we'll take a look at the bees and how they must look and what condition they should be so that they winter successfully, so that they'll be a good, strong hive next spring and make lots of honey, we hope. Before you work with a hive of bees, you must light up a smoker. You must have, because smoke is the only thing that bees are afraid of. They're not afraid of anything else. And so with smoke, you can handle them without getting stung to death. So we'll light that up, and I have a bag of shavings, and just simply, you know, wood chips. These are pine shavings, and you put them in the smoker, and then you just light them. And they burn quite readily. And the thing is with a smoker, when you're working with bees, is you have to be sure that it's well lit and that it doesn't go out. Because so many times you'll be working the bees and all of a sudden the bees get aggressive, they get the upper hand, and they start going at you, starting to sting the heck out of you, and your smoker's out. Then you're in trouble. Then you start running. So the first lesson you learn when you start keeping bees is to have a good smoker well lit. And so get a good bed of red hot coals, and that's what keeps the smoker from going out. And in spite of that, sometimes it will go out full. You have to put some grass on top to keep the shavings from falling out on the bees. Now for the bees to winter well, they must have a lot of honey. Now see, when you smoke them, see the bees will run in. And before you start working with a hive of bees, you always smoke the entrance first, because that's where the guards are. You know, the bees have guards in front of the hive, and if there's any disturbance, the guards come out, who's there, and if you don't have the right password, they nail you. So this is how we overcome their aggressive nature, because, as I mentioned, they're afraid of smoke, like all animals are. You know, bees are something like, you know, the cowboy movies, the good man, the bad man, the good man beats the bad man to the draw, he shoots first, or something like that. Well, it's the same way with the bees. You have to smoke them first before they sting you. If they once started stinging you, and you start smoking them after, you're too late. They beat you to the draw. Now this is a super on here, and a super means that it's a box of combs with honey in them, and this honey is the food for the bees. Now you can see the bees in here, and you see the bees, unlike other insects, bees don't hibernate. Bees stay alive all winter, and the only way they can stay alive, they have to generate heat. They have to keep warm, and they keep warm by eating honey. See, honey has a lot of energy in it, and by eating honey, even though the temperature may be 20 or 30 below zero outside, the cluster of this hive of bees in the middle of winter will be up to about 90 degrees above Fahrenheit, above 0 Fahrenheit. And they maintain that heat solely through the energy from the honey. And that's why honey is so important in their food for winter. If they run out of honey, they die very quickly. So honey is very important. Now what I want to do is to take out a comb first to show you what a comb of bees looks like. Now this is not a very good day to do this because it's cold and the bees don't like to be disturbed when it's cold.
Oh, so you would choose to do this on a less windy day?
Oh yes, you'd do this. Now this comb is empty. There's a little bit of honey here. And so I'll just
I'll try and see if they have any brood. Now, usually at this time of the year, they stop raising brood and they conserve their honey for the winter. And see, there's a little bit of brood there. But generally speaking, they're all finished with the brood rearing.
With the brood, that's what you said?
Yeah, this is not a very good frame of brood. We'll go and find another one that's a little better. And this comb should have a lot of honey in it. Yeah, it does. As you can see, this comb is full of honey. This comb has actually got about 5 pounds of honey in it. And so you see there's 1, 2, there's 10 combs in here. And they probably have, at least 40 pounds of honey in this box and about 30 in that. So they have about 70 pounds of honey for winter and spring feed. And that's plenty of honey for them for winter. This is the kind of hive we like to see. Now these bees are handling quite well considering the weather. You know, they're not as aggressive as they could be. And I give them a blast of smoke every little while to let them know that, you know, we're still here and we've still got the upper hand. I feel, anyway, that the products of the honeybee are very valuable in the treatment of deficiency diseases, because I feel that many natural products have a built-in immunological stimulating productive mechanism for maintaining health. Propolis has a very important therapeutic value. Pollen does, royal jelly does, honey. I think all these bee products have a very important place in medicine, in health. But being natural products, it's very difficult to get any research on them because, you know, they can't be patented or controlled, and anyone that spends a lot of money researching can't get their money back on all this money they spend. So it's going to be very difficult to prove these things. The only way you can prove it is to try it on yourself. One thing you know for sure, it isn't going to hurt you. So if you try it isn't going to do any harm, and it isn't going to cost anything. A lot of the research in bee venom therapy has been done in Russia. Before the Second World War, most of it was done in Europe, in Austria and Germany. But then after the war, Second World War, that sort of dropped, and then the Russians have taken it up. And they've done tremendous work with it. Artemov, for instance, in University of Gorky, did some wonderful preliminary research in bee venom, the physiology of bee venom. And so my trip to Russia was really very interesting in that respect. Of course, I met Professor Artemov, and unfortunately I wasn't able to talk to him. He didn't speak English or Spanish, and but we had a very good chance to meet through an interpreter. And so I visited many doctors working with bee venom in Russia and in Bucharest. And the thing that impressed me in Romania and Russia both is, as we know, they don't have much political freedom, but they have tremendous medical freedom. That's what really impressed me. You know, a doctor there, if he saw that something was of benefit or of value, he wouldn't hesitate to use it. In collecting bee venom, you have to have the bees attack the apparatus that you're going to collect the venom with. Actually, what you're doing is you're going to give the bees electric hot foot. The bees will crawl in the smallest hole that they can find, and when you're bundled up like this, and if the bees get inside of your clothes, there's nothing you can do, because you certainly cannot take your clothes off. All you can do is drop everything and run into the bushes. But when we're collecting bee venom, we can't do that. We have to stay and take it. You see, if you go into a bee yard and you have about, say, 50 hives of bees, and you give the whole 50 hives a hot foot, you've got thousands of bees after your hide. And so my suit, this suit, will actually be covered with bees stinging me, stinging right through the suit. But we only have one equipment now to collect the bee venom with, so we won't have that much trouble. Now this is a typical apparatus for collecting bee venom. As you can see, it's a wire grid with a sheet of membrane underneath it. These wires are charged with electricity, with a high voltage, which gives the bees a shock, but it doesn't necessarily kill them. And when they get the shock, they sting, and they sting that membrane under the grid, and the venom is deposited on the back side of the grid. Now this is the equipment for making the electric shock. I'll take this thing down now and put it out of the way. Now when the bees start stinging something, when they get disturbed, they give off an alarm odor. And when they smell that odor, the other bees become alarmed too, and they come out for the attack. And it's almost like a signal. Now, normally when I'm collecting venom, I have 4 sheets like this. I'll put it on one hive, then I'll go to the next hive, and 4 hives at once will be working on these collector sheets. And then after we're through with one hive, we go to the next, and in about 2 hours we can work all the hives in the yard, probably 40, 50 hives. You see, it takes 10,000 bees to make just 1 gram of dry bee venom. Now you see how the bees are beginning to really pour out. Let me show you this up close. Now you can see how those bees are viciously stinging that equipment. A lot of them, after they sting it, they work themselves loose and fly away, and if they don't lose a stinger, it doesn't hurt the bees, except it disturbs them quite a lot. The only thing is they'll remember me when I come back here again, and they'll be right after me.
The oldest known painting, strangely enough, is in a cave of spiders in Spain, which shows a picture of a prehistoric man robbing a bee's nest, climbing up a rope up a tree with a container, robbing the honey out of a bee tree. That's the oldest known painting in existence, which goes back over 6,000 years, I guess. I had a neighbor out on Washington Street, on Munger Street. He was a dairy farmer. See, this is 34. This was before we had electricity, before we had farm machinery. Everything was handwork. And this dairy farmer had a family farm of about 20 to 30 cows or something, and he milked cows twice a day by hand. Of course, he had no milking machines. And he had a bunch of kids, and of course, and he told me one day his hands were full of arthritis. And he said every time he milked those cows twice a day, he just cried with pain. And I said, George, why don't you take some bee stings? You know, somebody else told me about that, but I never had a chance to try it. I said, gee, I'd like to do it. So he'd come and see me every once in a while, and I didn't know much about it then. I'd stick the stings on his hands, sort of a haphazard way. I had a couple of youngsters working for me, and when I wasn't there, they'd put stings on George. I don't know what they did to him. But it usually ended up the boys got more stings than George did. And so, sort of a hit and miss fashion like that, I saw George later downtown on Main Street. And I said to George, I said, gee, how are your hands? Boy, look at that. He says, no more arthritis, no more pain. Oh, gee, he said, I milk my cows, no more trouble. And then he gave me my first lesson in the physiology of bee venom. You know, these things happen so out of the blue, so to speak. And he says, look at my hands. Gee, you look fine to me. Why, what's wrong with them? Yeah, they're fine now, but don't you remember how they were before? I said, no. Don't you remember how they were all swollen and purple looking? And I said, oh, that's right. See, his hands are full of edema, you know, and that purple cyanosis, lack of circulation. See, the blood doesn't get in there, the oxygen doesn't get in there, that's what gives them that purple look. And you'll see that on lots of arthritics where they have arthritis in the extremities, like the hands and feet and stuff. I said, gee, that's right. And then it dawned on me what the bee venom did was to dilate the blood vessels and restored the circulation to his hands, and that cleared up the arthritis.
We're going to get this hive ready for winter, and we do this with all our hives. We have about 1,000 hives, and so we do the same thing with one as we do with the others. So what we use for insulation is this bag, and it has a glass wool bat inside of it, just like you use for house insulation. And we just simply put it on top of the hive and take the cover and put it down over, push it down, and that will give them enough insulation to keep them warm enough. Now, years ago, we used to put insulation all around the hive. We used to put shavings and all that sort of stuff. But every year we did less and less, and finally we now, as long as they have a lot of honey, plenty of ventilation, and a little insulation on top, that's all they need. But we also have to tie the cover down, because in the winter, the high winds would blow the cover off, and then it would expose the bees to the snow and cold weather. So we tie the cover down with this bale of twine. All we do is just simply put around the hive like this, and we make a slip knot like that, tighten it, then come up the other side and bring it up like that. Whoop. Tighten it, make a knot, and that's all there is to it. I see even the strongest wind can't blow that cover off. And that hive's all ready for next winter. And so this is October. We won't see them again until next April. Well, here in Vermont, the winters are quite cold, about as cold as anywhere in the U.S. So if the bees can survive winters in Vermont, they'll survive a winter almost anywhere, because it is a long winter. And, but then when spring comes, it's surprising how quickly the bees can change from their winter hibernation or winter relaxation more than hibernation, and become active almost immediately.
course, you have to remember, I've been keeping bees now for, what, 70 years, something like that. And so naturally, in 70 years, you do learn a few things. Well, of course, we know bees are very important, primarily as pollinating agents. In other words, they're important in our food crop. As you know, in all forms of life on this earth, whether it's people or animals or plants or anything, in order to perpetuate life, you have to produce seed and you have to reproduce. And bees are extremely important in the reproduction of plant life. Now, of course, plant life is the foundation of animal life. Without plants, animals couldn't exist. So you might say bees are important for the foundation functions of life.
When you're working with nature as I do, with the bees and with the blossoms and things of that nature, you become quite closely associated with, well, this force, this power that guides or does this creation of life, if you want to call it that. Certainly is something more than just a materialistic thing. There's a great deal of spiritual process that goes on with it. Yeah, you don't have just the body. You've got to have the spirit, the life, the knowledge, the brain to go along with it. Otherwise, the body is useless without a spirit or a mind to go with it.